Smile, you're being recorded.
We're being recorded.
Hello, everyone. Thank you
live.
so much for joining us. We are live. We cannot hear you, but we can see your comments. So in case you have a question or you want to join this conversation, don't be shy. Put your comments below, and then we can or cannot highlight them. So hello, Saeed. Thank you for joining us. And we came here together with members of the Never Done Before community. My name is Miriam Hatness. I'm the founder of Never Done Before. And I have today with me Peggy, Therese, and Anushka. And we want to explore the Lonely Facilitator. Is it true? Is it a myth? Are we some of those? And if it's true, what can we do against it or about it? So let's start. Maybe we can have a round of introduction. Are you calling yourself a facilitator, and are you one of those lonely facilitators? Teresa, you look like
Okay.
you're ready
It's
to
always
jump
like
in.
who goes first? So I'm Teresa Desterbeck. I am a facilitator ever since somebody referred to me as being a facilitator. And then I was like, oh yeah, that is what I am. I also am a coach and a experience workshop designer. And I am not lonely, not at all, but that's intentional. I think it's very possible to be a lonely facilitator, but if you have intention, and my whole business is around creating connection and community. So I have to do that for myself as well if I'm going to be doing it with groups. Should I pass it to Anushka?
I can go next. I'm Anushka Rugge. I'm also a facilitator, and I'm the community facilitator of Never Done Before, full disclosure. And I was a lonely facilitator for the longest time, but at some point found my tribe and found my people, and it made all the difference for me. So yeah, I think it's a thing, and I think there's something we can do about it.
And I guess that's me. Hi, my name is Peggy. And so I'm a facilitator, but I never call myself as a facilitator before I joined Never Done Before, I say, and I actually didn't know about the job called facilitator. So I would say it's not that lonely for me, but I think joining a community really helped me a lot to figure out the direction I want to do.
Yeah. And I'm in this weird space where, yes, I do call myself a facilitator, although now I rather call myself a facilitation evangelist because I talk about facilitation more than I actually do facilitation. And I realized that, yes, we are there in charge of creating connection and community for others. And then very often being kind of at the sidelines. So never be really part of the conversation, never really being part of the collaboration or the community we build. And my introverted self actually enjoys that. Like, I love to be lonely. No, I love to be alone. Don't like to be lonely. And then I think it made all the difference to build the community and then to realize, oh, I am not alone with all the questions, all the things around the profession.
I'm thinking about, so I had, so those of you who are here, you know that I run book circles, and there was one that I used to do on Sunday evenings. And it was my weekend. And at some point I was like, I want to be a part of this. I don't want to just be the one holding the space for everyone else. So I asked the community members, I said, you know what, this is on my weekend. I'd feel a little bit like I want to be able to be absent sometimes. So I handed the group over to them and said, you've seen me now do this for a long time, but I want to learn from you and be with you and be in community with you. And so now that's how the model is. So it's not a part of my business anymore. And I'm a part of the community, and they get to practice their facilitation skills alongside me. And sometimes they have questions, but most of the time they just kind of do their own thing. And I love that because I'm learning just as much from them as they previously potentially had learned from me. So has anyone else done something similar?
Yeah, I've done
I can
similar
resonate with
things.
that. Yeah.
Peggy, go Peggy.
No, I think I also joined NGO education community last year. So I would say maybe I would be the not the oldest, but more senior person in the community, and I have more work experience. So in the beginning, like every time we have the meeting, it's always me to lead the meeting. And after the few times, I would say, yeah, I'm a bit tired of doing this. I'm not saying that. I didn't say that. I would say that maybe it's a good opportunity for everyone to practice your facilitation skill to lead a meeting. And then everyone say, okay, so maybe it's a good opportunity because everyone has their own full-time job. So we do this as a side project. So I think I would say like it might be a good also the good opportunity to practice your skill of leading the meeting, and also you can use the skill in your full-time job.
Yeah, I've done similars where friends and we needed certain spaces and we created them and we kind of handed them off to someone else. But where I found my loneliness the most challenging was like early on when I started in facilitation and when I still didn't know what that thing actually was. And I was like, oh, am I doing it right? Like I didn't have those role models. Like obviously there were like Miriam with her podcast, and there were the design thinkers, and there were the agile people. But I came to the work through youth work and non-formal education, which is a very specific approach to this work. And I always felt like the hippy dippy, the odd one out, like with my art supplies and my embodiment and experiential learning. Like, who am I? Do I fit in this world? Like, I'm not a slick corporate person who comes in and is just like, hey, here's my marker and I go moderate you now. And and like not having people I could reference was really challenging. And it came with a lot of insecurities where I was like, do I feel comfortable calling myself a facilitator, putting myself out there? Because I always felt like, oh, I'm not that kind of facilitator. And finding the community through the festival was just like seeing people who are weird like me, or weird in a different way, like weird in the same sense but differently applied, was just like, yes, okay, they're more like me, so we can all be weird together and we all have a permission and we all have a space to be. So that for me was like the hardest. I think if I wouldn't have found a tribe at that point, I might have not pursued it because I felt so out of place. Like I didn't had locally, I only had the IAF, which is a very structured organization. So I didn't really see myself there. So yeah. So for me, finding my tribe was really important and actually staying in the practice.
It's so interesting. What I hear is, on the one hand, the learning, so learning from community. On the other hand, the sense of I belong or I have a place. And I think for me, it was a mix of both. Funny enough, looking back, I think I didn't really understand what facilitation was before starting Never Done Before. Because for me, I mean, I did the podcast, yeah, and I heard about facilitation. And still, for me, facilitation was working with corporate teams on a very specific outcome. So facilitation for me was always related to, okay, we are here together to achieve a specific goal, an outcome on output, something tangible, and that's it. And then I watched the recording of the first festival because I didn't have the headspace or anything to actually be in a workshop, and I was shocked. I was like, "What? This is what we've been doing here? Where the mirror boards? Where the tangible outcomes? Where the strategy? Where the alignment?" And then I understood what it actually was. Yeah.
You bring up the idea of like what facilitation is, and is there like a single definition of a facilitator? And I often talk about how I don't consider myself to be a traditional facilitator because I don't do like process and strategic design and things like that within organizations. But that doesn't mean that I'm not facilitating and that I am not a facilitator. So it's interesting, I think, how do we define facilitation? And then what is our role in that facilitation? For me, because I work with groups for long periods of time, I end up becoming part of the community in a way. It's not like I work with someone for one time and then it's done. Usually there's a repeat due to the nature of my work. And so I see people on a fairly regular basis. And I haven't actually spoken to a client and met with them in a couple months. And I feel a little bit like I've been ghosted, like like it's a relationship and they've stopped communicating with me. So
And isn't this exactly the paradox where we create all of that and still we are not part of it? And Saeed just mentioned being a virtual facilitator. Is loneliness part of the job description?
I saw that comment. I was like, to a certain degree, yes. Like when you end the Zoom call, you're alone in your room. But then, like, I struggled with that for like when we started with COVID and on the virtual. I went from like I have my group in the room and I hold this space, like very tangible facilitation, to virtual. I was like, oh my god, I'm so lonely. And especially if we did deep work on values or on like on heavy topics, I switched off the Zoom and I was like, and now I'm alone with all of this emotional labor that I just did. But then I found people who do similar work to me, and I know that I can just ring them up and be like, hey, Adri, I just had this session on oppression and I just need to say my feelings to someone who understands it. I think that's a huge difference. Like obviously I could go to my flatmate or a friend and be like, hey, this is what happened in my work. But I think facilitation is a very specific kind of work that not everyone gets right away. They're like, oh, you hold space, so you hold up walls. Like, what does that mean? And then to be like going to someone who gets that, who you know you don't need to explain holding space, and being able to unburden with them, it's just like giving back a bit of like a community to virtual facilitation. Like, okay, I have my people that I can then turn to and be like, now that my Zoom is over, who can I talk to? Who can I chat with? Who can I download with? I think that was for me a big game changer on virtual facilitation, having those people for afterwards.
How is it for you, Peggy, this notion of loneliness in the virtual space? Because you live basically on two continents. You are half in the Netherlands and half in Taiwan. How does it play out for you?
Yeah, I would say, since you mentioned, because Mara know that since I joined Never Done Before, like in the beginning of moving into the Netherlands, so it was in the middle of pandemic. For me, it's like literally like really loneliness in every aspect. Yes. So yeah, I think, and then so of course before COVID, I never worked online. So I would just like everyone go to office and I talk to real people. And so after I moved into the Netherlands, I start, wow, it's like, so it's kind of, I would say if I can say I feel a bit isolated from outside world, because it was like, it's that I think for the first year, it was most like a lockdown in the city. And so I couldn't go out. So I started doing work online, and I would say I was lucky. I discovered Marian's podcast and then joined the community. So, yeah, then I joined the community. So I feel a bit, I would say, feel a bit more comfortable of working online. So like Anushka said, like after you close the Zoom call, like you still feel you can find someone to talk about your work. Yes, because I yes, I think like my ex-colleague in Taiwan, they cannot understand what I was doing. Like, okay, you work online, so how are you going to do that? Like, it's very difficult to describe your online work. Yeah, especially I think it's very, I don't know, it's not very tangible to describe your virtual facilitation, say. Yeah.
Thank you. And we have
Yeah.
questions coming in from our live audience. Yay. And I think they're both related by Stoyan's and Kat's question. And maybe we can start with Kat, actually, and then move to Stoyan. So the lone facilitator. So if I understand correctly, the lone facilitator in this content would be someone who's not part of a community, who is really working as a freelancer, working with their own clients, maybe not even collaborating. And that's what we saw also in the State of Facilitation report by Session Lab, that most facilitators apparently work alone. So how do they then benchmark themselves or get an idea of performing, how to improve, inspiration? And since we cannot speak for them, maybe you can speak from your experience, Teresa and Anushka. How has the community helped you to benchmark yourself or get an idea of who you are as facilitator, how you can improve and maybe find new inspiration?
I mean, I can speak to before I found the community, how I did it back then. Maybe that helps Kat. And then we talk about how we do that in the community now. But I fell in love with facilitation, with non-familiar. It was just like a love relationship from the beginning. So for me, I was just very curious. So what I did early on is finding a structure for me in which I make my learning, my discovering of new methods, my trying out an intentional thing. So I would scour the internet for resources. Whenever I got a client, I was like, oh, okay, what are all the resources I can pull on? What are the methods that, so I really kind of like made challenges for me, or I found a method and I was like, oh, this is an interesting method. And then find a way, how can I apply that in a way that it makes sense for my client? So it was a lot about intentionality. But obviously you don't really get feedback. I mean, you get feedback from your client sometimes. And it's not always super usable for like self-development, but I still like, I would kind of like set myself up with a challenge, do something intentionally different in a workshop, and then afterwards be like, okay, what is the reflection on this delivery? What worked, what didn't work? So it's really a lot about self-reflection, but also self-challenging, I think, what I try to do. I mean, I think it depends on your what you're as a type when it comes to that. Teresa, maybe you want to speak about how we do it in the community now? You're mute though.
I was eliminating the dog barking in the background. So for me, it's interesting because I joined Never Done Before, and I feel like even before I joined Never Done Before, a lot of my sessions were never done before. So I'm always experimenting and I'm always trying new things and I'm always open to feedback. So at the end of every single one of my sessions, I'm asking the participants what things were like. And since we meet for between 6 and 10 times, we develop that relationship over time. And it's really great when we're actually doing work around feedback or something like that, because I'm like, here we are, we're living the work. So you're giving me the feedback. And I think what really shifted for me joining the community was this inspiration. Because now as I participate and I watch other people's facilitation, I take little snippets from them or activities that I haven't done before. And then I call it the Teresa twist. So it's like, how can I take this and I can twist it around and bring my personality into it and my style. And depending on whatever book we're focusing on, I can do that. So I don't believe that there's really any brand new ideas out there. I think that we're all just twisting and manipulating and everything that has come before us. And I don't think I'm any different, and I probably don't think you are any different. So I really get so much inspiration and creativity. So it sparks something in me, and then I get to create from something new from whatever that spark was. And that's what the community has done for me.
Yeah, attending other facilitator sessions. I forgot about that, but that's gold.
Yes.
Like to see how other people do the work. It's just like, and even if you don't know them, just like sign up for, like, there's a facilitator you're interested in, a topic you're interested in, sign up for like an open workshop and then learn from that. That is also like a free resource basically out there.
And I think that being in other facilitator sessions, for me, there are two levels of learning. There's one, oh, what are they doing and how can I add, maybe not the Teresa twist, but the Miriam twist. Otherwise, it would be odd. So finding inspiration, making it my own, sometimes thinking, oh yeah, what if I mix these two? Or there are other activities like Jakob's Chromie, I now call it the activity wedding. He did it at a festival, I think in 2021. And it's now one of those standard activities that I do. And I always pray, this Jakob's activity. I wouldn't have come up with it myself. So that's great. And the other layer is to be back in the participant seat. So how just to observe myself, how comfortable, uncomfortable I feel doing something completely new, how I feel with too much or too little information, too much or too little time in the breakout room, the instructions. And I learned so much about my facilitation from just sensing how comfortable, uncomfortable it is as a participant.
Mm-hmm.
And
there's almost one more layer. It's like what shoe doesn't fit. Like sometimes I'm in facilitated space and I'm like, no, I actually don't want to do it that way. It's like I still have this pressure, like, oh, I need to be more corporate. Like I come from the NGO world. I do corporate clients, but no one has ever complained that I'm not corporate enough. But like my inner angst is like, oh, I should be more corporate. And then I go to a very corporate session. I'm like, yeah, nah.
yeah. So how do you know, or do you share your agenda beforehand? Because it can be quite intimidating, especially I remember my very first sessions for a client. I prepared that and then I would go there and just hope that it was good enough. How do you deal with that regarding Stoyan's question? How do you share your agendas? Or not?
Peggy, maybe you want to take it?
Yeah, I can take it. I do share agenda beforehand because I think I had bad experience from my previous work because I was working in a university and our principal always really I would say very strict on the agenda you are going to deliver in any I would say like conference or workshop, and she even like to change your agenda one day before, even you already have all the settings. So given the experience, I like to share the agenda, but I would just I won't share the details, like how am I going to deliver, or like really how many minutes in each like activity or like each sessions, because I actually I also recall there's one experience. um, Me and another co-facilitator, we had a session, and so it was a huge delay in the session, and so the client not text the activity, the rest of the activity, but we both me and the facilitator know like we won't be able to do all the activity because we didn't have enough time. And so yes, we didn't finish all the activity in the workshop, and then of course we hear the complaint after that. So yeah, so I would say yes, I will share agenda because I think they deserve to know a brief of your work and what you're going to do in the session, but not too much detail, I would say. I think it's also give yourself a bit more flexibility in the workshop.
I mean, when it comes to like peers, I think for me, like for one, we have a thing in the community that we call Brain Trust. So that's a monthly session that we host, or that we're hosting for people who are interested in running sessions for the festival. And those are basically peer-to-peer mentoring or peer-to-peer coaching sessions where you bring a session design, and it can either be for the community or it can be for a client, and then get feedback from all the people that show up that day. So it's very serendipitous of who you get there and who might give feedback, which can be super enriching. But then I'm also like, when I have something where I feel like a little bit stuck, I'm very strategic about who I ask, because either I'm stuck and I feel like there's something missing, then I ask someone who does a similar work or who does a similar workshop. Like, I know they do similar work, so I'm like, I'm missing something. What is it? Like, run them through. But then sometimes I'm like, oh, who could I spice that up a little bit more? How could I, like, there's some oomph missing here. So not like a missing piece, but some missing spice. And then I ask usually someone who does very different work. So either like it could be like I do a corporate session, I ask someone who does embodiment and art, and I'm like, how can we spice that up without stretching it too far? Or the other way is like, yeah, I know you do large scale with NGOs. I do large scale with NGOs. Can I just get your feedback on this? So with peers, I find it super enriching, because like, especially when you work without a co-facilitator, you're so narrow. You're like, oh, I have my briefing from my client, I have my approach, and now I try to tunnel through a session plan. And you just have your blinders on. And for me, then talking to a peer, either serendipitously or strategically, just like helps me to see it a little bit broader. I mean, co-facilitation fixes all of that, but we don't always
Not
get
necessarily.
Yes.
So I think we're going in two different directions with this question. So one is sharing agenda with someone else, like a co-facilitator, or not even another facilitator, not even someone that you're co-facilitating with. And through the NDB community, I have an accountability buddy. And so she and I check in every week. And so when I'm not sure about something that I have planned, I'll send it to her and she will give me feedback. And it's really great because she sees things in a different view than I see it. And so, for example, just last week, I created something that was never done before with a client and I was not so sure about it. So I sent it to her and she came back and said, hey, what are you going to do to support the people who are slower in processing? Because you and I are both fast thinkers. And I think that your design really supports those people who are fast thinkers, but it doesn't support the people who need more time to process. So with that feedback, I was able to, change things around. So there's that. So yes, going to brain trust and then having an accountability person within the network or within the community is really helpful. In terms of the question around, do I share with the communities that I work with directly? Yes. One of the philosophies and kind of pillars of my business is there's a leader in every chair, and the participants are leaders. And so I don't consider myself, I'm not training, I'm not the subject matter expert. The expertise lies in whatever book we're reading. And so they are as much a participant in the creation of our space as I am. So I might be holding it a little bit, but they're there. And so sometimes be like, oh, this might not be part of your curriculum. And I'm like, no, you are creating the curriculum. We're doing this together. So I send ideas to them a few days before we're going to meet. And then they give me feedback. Sometimes not everyone gives me feedback. And then from there, I design what we're going to do based on the feedback and what they want to really focus on.
Yeah, accountability partners, huge. And I think the brain trust, because even at early stage, I find the community aspect sometimes even more important when it's early stage agenda design. And I love the area Dare to Ask, where we can just add, okay, I got this brief from a client. This is my very raw idea. What would you do? Or I'm drawing a blank. What would you do? Very vulnerable. And then, in the last brain trust, I just jumped in. So I was holding space and I just jumped in because we're missing a third person in the group. And I got so many ideas that within 15 minutes, I got the entire session sorted. And it went in a totally different direction than I thought. And yeah, with clients, similar to Peggy, I do share the minimum because I think they need it. Yeah. I would love to because LinkedIn is going wild. You're having a side conversation. We try to bring you back here now. Don't we love the chat in our online workshops? Where participants do their own workshop while we try to facilitate the conversation.
Yeah, it's like FOMO that we just catch up on in the breakout. When they're in the breakout, you're like, oh, what is it? this.
So Marco, thank you so much for the question. What do you do when certain parts of you get lonely? And maybe for the context who haven't followed the chat and the comments on LinkedIn is we have different parts. Maybe we have those creative, we have the corporate parts, we have the extroverted, introverted parts. And is there one community who can fit them all, where we bring them all to the party? I'm thinking of Yaniv and his parts theater. A part of me is thinking this, another part of me is thinking that. How about you? What are you doing with your different parts, and when one gets dominant or the other one gets lonely? Do you have to create your own community, as I did?
Yeah, I think if you are in a community and you cannot show up as your weird self, then it's not the right community. I have been in other communities before NDB, and I've always felt like, oh, I'm like I had this sense of not being established enough or not being techy enough, or and for me it was just like I hadn't had a fit. But also over time I established a lot of like one-to-one relationships with facilitators I got to know in NDB or outside, and they are very catering towards a certain need. So I have a friend when I want to talk about everything social justice and how that impacts facilitation. I know I can ring her up, and I know that with other people I need to be a little bit more holding back on my little activism. We're gonna fix the world through facilitation bit. So it's like, yeah, you can curate those specific friendships. And I believe that is something like facilitator friends, facilitator besties. But also like there are communities that might be a fit for you. For me, NDB, even though the people are so in part so different to who I am, how I see the work, what beliefs I have outside the practice, but I still like we're just right now having a conversation around what it means to be a neurodiverse facilitator. And that's a super vulnerable conversation to have. But over time within NDB, we cultivated so much psychological safety that people can bring this really vulnerable parts and be like, hey, with my neurotype, this and this challenges come, and the whole community chimes in what our approach that we have. So I think if you're feeling like you have to hold back in certain communities, it might not be the right one yet. But also like it's like, how daring are you? I think we also shape the spaces that we're in from how we show up in them. So if you don't dare to, or if I didn't dare to bring certain things to a space, how would I know if it would be welcomed? You know? So it's like always a little bit of give or take, but obviously I think the more psychological safety there is in a community, the easier it gets to show up as your fuller self. Yeah, and then gets the specific friends for the specific construction sites.
I would like to add on Anushka. I think Never Done Before is the first community I joined. I never joined any community before, Never Done Before. So it's always more like a workspace in my personal life. That's it. So I think, yes, I think I was a bit hesitate to join if I need to join a community. But as I mentioned before, it was in the midst of pandemic. I don't have any friend in the Netherlands, so I think I need to talk to people, even it's online. So I was okay, maybe just give it a try and see how community work, and maybe I can know some people, and yeah, and after the yes, of course, Never Done Before is not the only community I joined. I also participate in other community, and I think it's really, I think I would say join community help myself to discover different part of myself, like maybe part of yourself what you never seen before. Yeah, so I would say, yeah, different community maybe have different, I would say maybe different function for yourself.
Miriam, you look like you were going to say something earlier.
Yeah, there's so many parts. One I really resonate with was Said said that a community does not mean that we have everything in common and that we need to share everything. It doesn't even mean that we have to be friends. Although I must say that funny enough, whenever I meet an NDB member in person, I found out, could be friends, definitely friends material. So I think that's a good sign. But this being said, I've created the only community that I would want to be part of, because before NDB, I wasn't part of a community. I'm not a community person. Instead, I joined entrepreneur communities and I have a running community, and they only see parts of me. So in one, I am the runner and I don't talk about anything but running. And in the entrepreneurial community, it's difficult to really show all my parts because they don't get the biggest part, which is facilitation. And then I think the way people communicate and interact in these communities is difficult because it's so different from how we communicate. But I think the most important part that I wanted to make was that I think it's also our job to create or to design the community of which we want to be part of and how we can bring our different parts in. And it's obviously a question of how big the community is. So if there are thousands of members, how safe can it feel? But then for everything below 200, I think, and we are a mini community of maximum 150 at the moment. We're just below 100. I remember this time last year, NDB was very quiet, and we had 2 members coming and were like, "Hello, where is everyone?" And it was very daring. And Anushka and I, we had to ask ourselves the question, so are we showing up? Are we showing all our parts? Do we want to be part of the community? And then it was our energy to bring back in things and to bring all of our parts in so that we allow the other members also to bring their parts. And I think that's something we often forget, that if we are part of a community, it's also our job to design and create the community we want to be part of.
And what we also did is to very honestly ask the community. We reached a point where it was do we continue? Do we not continue? What do we how will this look in the future? And we were like, listen, community, this is as much your space as it's Miriam, as is mine. What is it what you want out of NDB? And what are the things that we can bring to it, that you can bring to it? So we had very honest conversation. I think that really made a difference and increased really also what people were willing to bring in, because they saw this intention around what we were building and how serious we took them. So I think that was a big bit. And I mean, also to say it, we're very different in NDB. There are folks where I'm we're polar opposites, but still we have this one connection, which is facilitation and which is the love for this kind of work. And that just is enough to find richness and find learning and find community in our differences.
I'm just thinking more about the question about the different parts. And I think for me, I have small communities, and I've also recognized for me, I am one of those, if I have an idea, I'll take the initiative and I'll just start it. But there was a time last year where I was starting too many different things. And I was like, it's exhausting. I don't want to always be the one in charge. I'm already facilitating and holding this space for all these other communities, all these companies. I don't want to keep having to do this for myself. And so for me, I wanted something where I didn't have to be the one in charge. And so Miriam is the one in charge and Anushka is the one in charge. So I can go, but that doesn't necessarily, by participating in the Never Done Before community, that doesn't mean that I'm not still a very big part of the community and that I get to be that leader in the chair just as much as everyone else in the community. And so I think I get to help design the community and participate in the community as well. But I don't have that same pressure on myself. And so that's what I needed when I joined.
And I thank you for making this distinction, because in the chat there's also the discussion, okay, shall we create our own community? And yes, as you said, there are pros and cons. And sometimes, especially I think if we're facilitators, it feels good to just lean back and to be facilitated, having someone to hold space for you. So just to sharing the responsibility or even giving it up. And then I think there's a big difference also between free communities and paid communities. And I don't think that one is better than the other. It's really just a matter of choice and priorities. So for me, when I started NDB, it was very important that it would be a paid community, because for me, I wanted people to make the commitment that, okay, I put my money where my mouth is. I invest literally in the community, and then also contribute more than money. I mean, and we're currently collecting tips and tricks for new members. I think, Teresa, was it you who said you get out what you put in? Usually, hopefully, you get out more than you put in.
Yeah.
And I think with the free communities, the problem very often is that they're very large and they're usually focused around one product. So Said, he mentioned the butter community, which is beautiful. It's a huge community. Everyone loves the product butter. And then it's a community of practice and of sharing. And I think they do a lot of things that we also do. And then we are method agnostic or tool agnostic. And I think then it's a matter of preference.
Yeah, and also like just as a warning, or not as a warning, but as a remark to people who want to start a community, I think, Miriam, it was very lonely at the beginning to start your own community and having to think through things, what you want to create. Like I started with a collective, like we were 4 women who started a collective around decolonizing DEI, and even that felt lonely in the beginning, because we were like, it was the 4 of us into the ether, and like, is anyone listening out there? So like creating your own community doesn't necessarily mean you're not lonely anymore. Like it still can be lonely, especially if like you might not have the sparring partner or the thinking partner or the support person who you can actually talk through with thing, or the wisdom circle or whatever you want to call. Like if you, then you also need to create that structure for you, in which you then build your community if you don't want to be lonely at the beginning. I think that's also important to keep in mind. And that, oh yeah, you go, Miriam.
It's maybe
because
just
I was
like
somewhere completely different, so you respond first.
You can read my face so much.
We know each other for a while by now.
No open book. And I think it's also like in a relationship. Actually, being in a relationship can be even more lonely than being a single. And so there's always an effort that you have to put in. And I think it can be very lonely to be in a large group or at a party having the impression that everyone is having fun except you. And that's maybe a benefit then of having a paid community where you do get a little bit of someone Anushka holding your hand.
I remember when I first started to move from coaching to my book circle work, I tried to build a Facebook community, and I tried the free version and then the paid version. And even though there were thousands of people in the Facebook community, I still felt super lonely. And I created these, workshops once a week where we came together around a book, and I designed this whole thing. And because it was free, people would very easily be like, there's something else going on, and they wouldn't show up. And so I think there is definitely benefits to having a free community, but I also know for myself, it's just like the gym. If you pay if you pay for your gym membership, you're more likely to actually go. So I show up fairly regularly to NDB when I have the capacity to. I do. But it's because I know in the back of my head that I paid for this community and I want to get something out of it. And I know that if I hadn't paid for it, then I could very easily just pick up a book and start reading. Because I just think that there's someone, Dan Ariely does work on this. You probably know, Miriam, from your behavioral scientist background, but like it shifts the dynamics of how we show up when we have paid.
Yeah. And I love your example about the free Facebook community. Oh, geez. I started Facebook communities before at the beginning in my kind of experimental phase. And I think it's the most frustrating than to put yourself out there and to have these thousands of people. I didn't have thousands, I have hundreds. And nobody's replied constantly to speak to the void. And it made me feel so insecure and vulnerable. And I now understand what the problem was. We didn't have a real purpose. And it was unclear for whom it was for, and it was free. So everyone joined just to begin. Nobody really knew what to do. And then it didn't feel as if I could bring in all my parts to come back to Marco.
Yeah, I think there's one more component that we haven't talked about yet. It's about being a freelance facilitator or an independent facilitator. There's the physical loneliness in your geography. Like, there's not really an NDB in every city, obviously. Like, there's not a facilitator group in every city. So that can also feel very lonely. Like, when I started this work, I was living somewhere super rural. There was like nothing. Like, no one knew this work. So, but I also feel like for me now, I have that need covered by going to co-working spaces. So I have an office once a week or twice a week. I have a colleague. I have someone saying good morning, someone knowing how to drink my coffee. Like all of those physical needs around loneliness are met there. But obviously the people in the co-working space aren't facilitators. So my inner facilitator would still feel very lonely. But that is what I then get of NDB. I think it's also like to get all your facets around loneliness met, you need different tools to tap in. Like, I mean, I could get on a Zoom call with an NDB member every day and do co-working digitally, but it's still different than having a space where you belong physically, having the desk neighbor, having the conversation, or like, there is still something to having, a geography, a location for your physical body that is different than your computer. So for me, that makes really shifted. Like I started going to a co-working space late last year, and since I go there, I just feel wholer. Like I feel like, okay, there is more of a thing, a body to my work, and it's not just like me switching on my laptop.
Well, Anushka just gave me the idea. Maybe I should start trying co-working space when I go back to the Netherlands.
Also there, like I think I tested like 8 and I settled on 2. So you also get like what you want.
And I think one thing that I hear from that is also who is responsible for. So I think going to a community and then expecting that they are in charge to filling your own void is maybe asking a lot. And that's what I appreciate in any facilitation community, that in general, members are highly self-aware and take responsibility for how they feel and don't blame others to make them feel a certain way. And then, yes, more or less.
I mean, better than in other communities, I would say.
I think it's part of being a good facilitator. You're self-aware, hopefully. But then, as going into a facilitator and hoping or expecting that they will come to make you feel less lonely or fill the void, that's maybe not the solution. Also, community is not group therapy.
True.
Yeah. And yes, Teresa, you looked as if you wanted to say something.
No, I was just wondering if there's any other comments from the community, because I'm not looking at them. Speaking of community.
Yes.
Let's check at the people in the comments.
Romy asked, how do you personally define, well, she asked Said, but we cannot hear Said. Maybe we can take this question. How do you define community?
I think for me, the simple definition is a community is a group of people who look out for one another.
Yeah, I think and have something in common. I think community. I think there's something to them. There's something that binds them. It could be a neighborhood, it could be a topic, it could be a purpose, like something that actually brings them together to have something in common. And then that for me then would be the difference between a gathering and a community actually takes care of each other, like has some shared responsibility for co-creating the space. I often talk about like collective care aspects. It's like, for me, a community is where we actually take care of each other, where we take care of each other's well-being to a certain degree. I mean, as Mira said, there's also my own responsibility, but I think for me, a neighborhood shifts into a neighborhood community when I actually know my neighbors, and I find like I go beyond the common pleasantries, like, hey, but I maybe help them bring their groceries up, or I know what's going on in their life. So that's kind of, for me, then shifting from my neighbors to my neighborhood community. And I think then for facilitators, the same. Like, are we just facilitators, or are we facilitators that try to do something, shape something together?
Yeah, I actually would like to add on Anushka. I think the community is like you have a group of people who have common interest and you want to do something together. And because the community I mentioned earlier, NPO education community. So actually, the most of community member not from the educational background. Most of them, I cannot say most of them, many of them, they are engineers. They are doing something else, nothing related to education. But we just join together and like let's say we want to build a website, and then those engineers can help, but they are happy about that. So like we want to do something, but we like kind of attract people from different backgrounds join together.
Yeah. And so I agree with all of that. And I love the different layers. And there's the economist in me. Also, no, I won't speak about money. But I think that for me, community creates value through its members. So it's not that there is one guru who allocates or who surrounds themselves with members and then calls it the community, and there's only one person creating value, so to speak. For me, the value really comes in the exchange and everyone bringing in a different part, a different perspective, so that I think in the best situation, the founder of the community can remove themselves and almost unnoticed.
And I actually think a good interaction in the community, it actually can move a person to different life direction. And I would say that in the community I have in another community I joined, like so the person, he actually doesn't have any like engineering background. He just want to build something for the community. So he started learning how to do coding. So then finally he become the engineer. Yeah. So and he's also very happy about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a few members in at NDB who joined and suddenly realized that they are facilitators who want to do more facilitation instead of just coaching. In other times, facilitation is not fun.
We had some that were the opposite. Like, I think I'm a coach. I think I'm not a facilitator. And that's also nice. Like, I also think a community can mean different things to different community members. Like, I think we have like we have a couple of people in NDB who are there for Let Me Lie 3 years. I have not seen them a single time. But I know they're watching recordings and I know that they're reading the things because when I've seen them or like heard about them, I was told they do. So like there's also like, yes, there are the more passive members in the community that maybe are busy, or maybe I know, like for us, a challenge in NDB is always the time zones. So they're just location for which it's a little bit harder to participate. But they still get a value of it. And when they show up, they're familiar enough with the community that when they show up, it's impactful and meaningful for them and for the rest of the community. I think that's just something beautiful to see. It's like you cannot confuse, or you shouldn't confuse engagement with community.
100%. And I was thinking about the same thing just now as you spoke. I had a podcast recording with Jerry, which will be out in a few weeks. And he mentioned that in his community, someone reached out that they have social anxiety and therefore don't know how to interact and what to do. And I think that's another aspect. There are people who feel more or less comfortable with being out there and still feel less lonely by knowing that they have access. So maybe we don't hear from them, maybe they're not on stage, but just knowing that there is a space where people share and being part of it, even passively, helps many who are maybe in the spectrum or have social anxiety or other issues. And I think that's what community is also there for. Who are we to judge what engagement must look like?
Yeah.
Because it's
For example,
not about
that's why we
us.
we do so much onboarding. We had someone who joined who was also super social anxious, and I just said like, okay, I go into a session with you together. Like I'm gonna be there, I'm gonna show up, and she came. That just made it easier for her. So like, if you build a community, also think about how do you bring people in, because that can make all the difference from just like sign up and then I'm exposed to it all. But we are now really trying to make this a celebration and onboarding, a beginning of a story. Because we noticed that it's hard for people. Like we reached the 100 people mark, which is like more than a village for some folks. So it feels already like a little bit scarier to come in. And I like really like, I think community can only create belonging if it's purposefully from the moment you join.
Yeah. Thank you. We're at the hour. What a rich conversation. Thank you so much. Maybe we have time for a round of a takeaway or final word. What can we do with the Lonely Facilitator? What's your bottom line of our conversation?
I think I'm thinking about recency and latency. So the recent thing that Anushka just said about starting of a story, I'm thinking about how when you join the community, or when you join a community, you are part of writing that story. And it's not somebody else's job to write it for you.
Beautiful.
Can we put that as a testimonial on the website?
Feel free.
I think like and that's something I realized for myself. Like I had loneliness in very different parts of my life for a very long time, but also like in some parts, loneliness is something we self-create. Like with the boundaries we set ourselves, with the beliefs that we are limiting our engagement with others. And for me, the moment I had NDB and I found a community, a tribe for that, I had a positive experience where I was like, oh, where else am I'm actually the person who makes me lonely? Yeah, it's not the friends who are not reaching out, it's me who's not answering to the friend. It's like, I think often when you're very, very lonely, you feel it's very feeling like it comes from outside, it feels very oppressed, but sometimes it's also us ourselves kind of like wrapping ourselves up in the loneliness. And for the lonely facilitators out there, reach out. Like they're amazing people. Like I've never, like facilitators are such generous people. maybe that comes with the work. Maybe we're just the kind of personalities. And I think reach out. If you feel lonely as a facilitator, LinkedIn, reach out, send a message, send an email, join a community that's for free to begin. And see if you can pull that blanket of loneliness away a bit.
I think I actually consider myself as an introvert. I'm the only child in the family, so I think I never really feel I'm lonely as a person. But maybe professionally, sometimes I think I really need some advice, and especially if I'm working as a freelancer. So it's kind of really difficult to find someone to talk about your work and have a discussion. And I think having a community with you, it's really nice. And of course, it's not just about the work. You always can talk something else other than facilitation.
Yeah. And yeah, for me, it's also the Lonely Facilitator is, community is one solution. And then there's one-on-one, there are accountability groups, there's LinkedIn, there are LinkedIn groups. And depends on which part is lonely and how we can soothe that. One thing is for sure, I didn't feel lonely for the last hour. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the rich comments and interaction in the chat. Bye for now. We might see you at the Never Done Before community. Whoop, whoop.
Yes.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for watching us.
Bye.